Welcome to Jorg Bird's Grimoire of the Macabre. I'm Jorg. I'd say it's a pleasure to have you all here tonight, but the ceremony would have taken place with or without you, as the Grimoire demands sacrifice. So a sacrifice must be made. So without any further ado, a recitation from the Grimoire. Excerpt from the Lem Schaefer interview, 2003. There's a certain road in Knox County, Tennessee, the place I called home for the significant bulk of my life. It stretches for 4 miles between a major highway and a smaller thoroughfare, the land between being populated by 3 farms, spaced out at uneven intervals in the wilderness between. At least that's how it was when I was a boy, I've not been back for 20 years. Now, back in the 60s, you gotta remember, we didn't have phones, didn't have the internet. Hell, we barely had TV. And in those days, things were different. Walter Cronkite read the news every night, and if he said it happened, damn it, and that's just the way it was. Point being, we just didn't know as much in those days. And there's more danger in going out alone, especially at night. If someone didn't know where you went and up and disappeared, you may well never be found. One of those farms was owned by Bo Russell, the only black man in the county then, to my knowledge, and he'd let Pa and me hunt on his land after dark when Pa got off his shift at the factory. Bo and Pa were always no-nonsense types, right? The kind that thought if something seemed unexplainable, then it was you who was missing something, not something that was missing, if you catch the meaning. But Ma was always more of a spiritual sort, always warning us off about the haints and the spooks that made their bones in the dead of night. Back in those times, folk at the corner stores would talk about cursed Indian burial grounds in hushed whispers, and it wouldn't be unusual to find charms or wards being sold next to the magazines at the grocery. Like I said, me and Pa didn't put much stock in such things, but Ma'd always force one of those charms into my hand as I left the door. When I'd tell Pa, he'd tell me to leave her be. It's bad luck to break a commandment, see. So, I always took one. We'd each get a lantern, a gun, and a small pack of supplies, mine with the charm. Of course, we had George with us, our old coon dog. There weren't any street lamps back then, so when it was dark, you couldn't see your own feet walking in front of you, and you sure as hell weren't going to see anything else. So George had the job of spotting our prey so we could dim the lights, not wanting to scare nothing off. Well, that area, really Appalachia in general nowadays, gets a lot of talk about supernatural happenings and such, UFOs, ghosts. But no one I knew personally ever saw anything themselves, and I never did either. Except the once. One night we were deep in the boonies just off of Bo's property line when George got the scent of a possum. When we gave chase, we about ran off a little precipice that wasn't too high, but sloped so sharply we might could have died had we been less fortunate. But George stopped ahead of us and spared us our fate. Good dog to the end, he was. God rest his soul. Saved as I was, when I skidded to a stop in the loose terrain, I kept a hold of my gun, but the pack came loose. And it went hurtling down to the bottom of the slope. I went over to see if I could spot it, but the lantern light didn't reach to the bottom, and in that pitch black, you'd have better luck finding a flea in a typhoon. Well, the possum had treed up right on the edge of that slope, and George was barking up a storm, so Pa told me to get ready, and he'd take the first shot, and I'd be the backup. Pa got his shot off, but missed, and I steadied my arm, but was interrupted by a growling coming from the direction of the slope. It startled me, and I pointed my gun at that dark and leaned over for another look, thinking it might be a bobcat. But it was a great shadow that lunged from the bottom then, leaping up in great bounds until it cleared the edge, cleared me, and landed straight in the tree we'd been aiming at. Pa yelled out, fired a shot that glanced off of it. I was too scared to peep. There's some things in this world I wish I could forget the sight of, but this one I sure won't. It was like the anteater I'd seen at the traveling zoo in the city. Long, narrow snout attached to a devil's face, matted with gray fur that was so dark it shined blue with the light's reflection. It had ears like a bat, and wings to match, limbs like an ape's, coiled sinew all over its massive frame. But the eyes were what stuck with me. The eyes and the hands. Hands like a man's, almost bare where all the rest was covered. And the eyes, too, like a man's, betraying some kind of intelligence not of this world, as far as I'm concerned. We looked at it, and we looked at death. And we'd gotten between death and its prey. It snatched the possum up in its jaws, which opened like a thin beak that stretched to swallow the thing whole. Poor beast had been paralyzed. If it hadn't been eaten immediately, I'd be a betting man that fear itself could have killed it. The demon displayed itself to us, stretching its wings out wide, and made plain that this was its domain. It was by its grace and its alone that we roamed those woods unmolested. It let us go. We ran home so fast I can't even remember doing it. Poor George wouldn't go outside for months, been cowed proper. And Pa stopped hunting in the evening time. Of course, no one believed us, except the odd folk or two that said they'd seen it too, but I have no way to tell if they were fooling or not. Them and Ma. At the least, I can say I traded a pack for one hell of a story, right? And an uncomfortable awareness of my mortality I didn't have before. To this day, I still think about it, constantly. How I lost the charm before it appeared, how it could have killed us so easy and didn't. And it makes man wonder if such things do hold power. Things like charms and such. It makes you wonder if forces beyond our grasp really do work in this world, turning the gears of fate unseen by us mortal men. Neither me nor Pa ever had the heart to test that theory. And regardless of the time of day, we took 2 charms every hunt from then on. Well, that was quite the tale. Do you think he was telling the truth? I must say I have some knowledge of dark things, but even I'm not sure. I guess we'll never know. That concludes the evening ceremony. Stay safe out there.